Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Gaming Graveyard. Yeah, we're still doing that. Today, we will be discussing Free Radical Design's attempt of going into the 7th generation of consoles with a bang. Haze, and how a mighty developer that is behind some of the most beloved games like Timesplitters 1 and 2 could be essentially killed off by a single game. So without further ado, this is the story on how Free Radical and Haze joined the Gaming Graveyard. Free Radical Design was founded in 1999 by these four names that I'm going to butcher: David Doig, Steve Ellis, Carl Hilton, and Gramain Norgate. The first ever game would be released in 2000 and would be dubbed Timesplitters. It received respectable reviews, getting an 8 out of 10 by most reviewers, and by fans was a beloved product and was pretty much immediately greenlit for a sequel. Timesplitters 2 would come out in 2002 and a similar reaction would be seen. It would be beloved by fans, liked by critics, and, overall a solid game. However, this success simply wasn't enough for them to keep their publisher, Eidos Interactive, which would be dropped and Free Radical would move on to finding a new publishing partner. Their next game, their next success, I wouldn't say that, Second Side would be published by Codemasters. It wasn't as well received as their previous projects though, and Second Side did kind of financially struggle to turn a profit. So after a struggle-filled game of Second Side, they decided to turn away from Codemasters and go back to what they were used to. And they decided to make Timesplitters Future Perfect, which would be published by everyone's favorite and a familiar face here at the Gaming Graveyard, EA. After what we can assume was a terrible publishing partnership because, it's EA, once again, Free Radical was on the lookout for a publishing partner. But this time, they were heading into the 7th generation of consoles. That's when they found Ubisoft, and at the time, Ubisoft's reputation wasn't, NFTs, and they were actually respected. At this time, Ubisoft was at the top of their game, with Assassin's Creed being at the peak of its popularity. So with both sides being at the peak of their popularity, and assuming that this would be a really smart partnership, the deal was signed. Now for Free Radical, they began concepting what they wanted this next game to be, and very quickly the team decided that they wanted this next game, which would be dubbed Haze, to be the most realistic and brutal first-person shooter they had ever developed to that point. And one of the ways they decided to do this was by developing a brand new engine, as their old engine was quite outdated, going back as far as the PS2 days. This new engine, however, was being developed as they were going into the 7th generation of consoles, and for those of you that know anything about the 7th generation of consoles, you would know that creating a brand new engine at this point was basically a 50-50 chance that your company would be filing bankruptcy in the next year. The 7th generation of consoles was just very hard to develop for, especially the PS3. Steve Ellis, one of Free Radical's founders, had this to say about the engine being developed at this time.
Making our own tech was something that was important to us, and we wanted to carry that forward. However, we also thought that the old engine was looking a bit creaky, and rather than upgrading it to what was needed for the next gen, we decided to throw it away and start again. In retrospect, that was probably a mistake, and certainly that was part of the problem when we began working on Haze.
Most companies that found success during the 7th generation were ones using older technology that they were more familiar with instead of embracing the new technology that was available. Unfortunately for Free Radical, these engine problems weren't really Ubisoft's problem, as the contract that they had signed with Ubisoft clearly stated that Haze had to be out by a specific time. The game's premise from the get-go was going to be relatively simple: super soldiers on Nectar, which is a super powerful drug of sorts that soldiers can take that make them shoot better and also causes you to take less damage, however can cause hallucinations, which is kind of the con of using it. It was in the plot and also affected gameplay. It was a rather neat idea and I give Free Radical that, however it was not going to be easy to pull off. Haze would be officially revealed at E3 2006. The reveal was nothing spectacular, however one thing that is very important is that Haze was scheduled to release in 2007. But due to all of these engine problems, that was not going to happen. Or at the very least, it was not going to be a full-fledged game if it was to release in 2007. Right around the game's reveal in 2006, the term Halo Killer was starting to be used by the press and fans alike to describe Haze. This was the first signs of the publisher and developer strongly disagreeing, with Ubisoft embracing the Halo Killer moniker and wanting it to be spread more and more, Meanwhile, for Free Radical, they were very much so against the comparison, as they weren't even using Halo as a guideline, and even if they were, it was unlikely to compete with Bungie, who at this point was going on to their third Halo game and had basically mastered the formula. Now, many may be asking, well, why Halo? Like, why is it picked as Halo Killer? Like, there could have been so many other games chosen. Well, that's because at some point, 2007, for whatever reason that is not publicly known, but I mean, I have a guess, Haze was now becoming a PS3 exclusive. So now, there was a dog in the fight for PlayStation players to want this to be better than Halo. This is what Derek Littlewood, the game's creative lead, had to say about the Halo Killer moniker and how the team felt about it.
The Halo Killer thing wasn't something the dev team invited. I think the idea of two competing developers making FPS games for rival consoles was an exciting narrative for some, but it wasn't a thing that had any basis in fact.
Oh, and remember that whole, well, working on new technology during the 7th generation was a 50-50 chance of going bankrupt? Well, working on a PS3 exclusive was more like a 90-10% chance you were going to be going bankrupt. So if their odds weren't looking good before this decision, it certainly wasn't looking good after the decision. Ultimately, that 2007 release date, as you probably could have guessed, was unrealistic, and it got pushed even further by this point. Free Radical was just desperately trying to fix all the problems the game was having. One of their biggest problems they were having was AI. These delays, however, weren't really used properly, as Ubisoft didn't want them taking features out of the game, and they especially didn't want them to not add more features. So instead of fixing the game, they were adding even more content the game simply could not keep up with. Derek Littlewood would also have this to say about the delays of Haze.
Rather than actually working on the things that the delay was originally intended to give us time to solve, much of the extra time was either used talking about potentially delaying the game further or implementing extra features. There was a similar problem with cutting features or content, something I believe is crucial to the development of any game, no matter how large or small.
With the game still not making the progress that Ubisoft had been hoping for, Ubisoft decided to make quite the drastic decision. They decided to send down their own designers and developers and leads to the Free Radical team in order to take over development. At this point, Free Radical in Ubisoft's eyes was seen as incompetent, who couldn't get the job done, and they had to be taken over. And yeah, it was basically a hostile takeover, and if anybody didn't comply, they were either going to get the game canceled or, well, they're going to get fired. So instead of fighting Ubisoft on basically taking over their game, they instead said, whatever, we will just do what you want and get the game out the door. And Free Radical, I don't think they expected exactly what get the game out the door really meant. Because what followed was 16-hour workdays every single day for months. It was hell. The crunch was unrelenting and people were not even being given breaks. But in the end, the game was finished, and heading into the new release date of May 20th of 2008, Haze would finally be released, and it would be ripped apart by critics and fans alike. It was being called a generic and boring first-person shooter with tons of bugs and AI problems that were hard to overlook, and maybe, just maybe, if those problems were fixed, it would be a relatively playable game. Either way, that judgment call did not come down from Free Radical whether the game was going to be fixed or not. Derek Littlewood had this to say about the company's mentality on Haze's reviews.
Rereading some of the reviews today, the thing that bothers me more than anything is the real sense of disappointment a lot of players felt. That's more difficult to deal with than any of the other comments directed at the game because it means these people really cared and simply felt let down.
In the end, Free Radical was still hoping and praying that Ubisoft would let them fix and patch Haze. They were even working on a patch that was basically ready to go out, but Ubisoft shot it down. So in the end, Haze got taken out back and put down. It's a real shame. I definitely think Haze had a ton of potential. Either way, after Haze's absolute failure, Free Radical would go on to sell their company to Crytek. Ubisoft would go on to be, well, the NFT people, I guess. And well, neither company ever really talks about Haze, and that's probably because, well, Ubisoft is alive but doesn't care, and Free Radical is currently shut down. Haze is an unfortunate story about a game company that was beloved by fans but made a series of unfortunate decisions that they could not have known was a bad call at the time. Creating their own in-house engine was a bad call, but at the time, well, it made sense because they did it for all their previous projects. In the end, Haze will forever be a member of the gaming graveyard. If you know any other stories about games just simply not living up to the hype, or just simply not selling that many copies, or just dying after a long run as a multiplayer shooter, please let me know in the comment section down below, or you can email me. It's in my description. Whatever works for you. Thank you all for watching. If you didn't like the AI voices, by the way, I won't do them again. I thought I'd mix it up. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Have a good one.
Drink cactus juice. It'll quench you. Nothing's quenchier. It's the quenchiest.